The whole city told her she was insane for believing an old letter from a dead uncle. But in the frozen winter of Duluth, a 7-month pregnant woman bought the salvage rights to a sunken cargo ship in Lake Superior for almost nothing. And when her loyal German shepherd began scraping at the ledger maps, she realized there was more to this wreck than old steel and rust. What they uncovered beneath that black winter water would rewrite a family's history and change the fate of everyone who ever doubted her. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. It's always incredible to see how far these impossible stories travel. Winter in Duluth, Minnesota is a vicious kind of cold that feels like it was sharpened somewhere in Canada before it crossed the lake to cut straight through human skin. Sarah Miller moved slowly through that frozen night as if each molecule of air had an extra weight and was trying to pull her down. She was 31, 5'7", lean, but swollen with 7 months of pregnancy, all angles softened by the round house her body had become. She had mid-length brown hair, usually tied in a low, messy bun, because it irritated her to feel it stick to her neck when she sweated inside her coat, and her skin was pale enough that bruises bloomed quickly on her arms if she bumped a cart. She used to call herself pretty back before exhaustion became her second skin, back before hope leaked away drip by drip. Now she looked like a woman made of thin glass trying not to shatter. And she was now 6 hours into a 12-hour overnight shift, cleaning the cardiac wing at St. Luke's Hospital in Duluth. Her back already ached in waves that made her catch her breath as she pushed the mop head across the wax tile. Her belly felt like a planet orbiting out in front of her, pulling the rest of her body behind it. Her dog Ranger lay curled like a brown and black comma near the break room door, loyal, alert even when sleeping. Ranger was 7 years old, a large German shepherd with a sable coat that shimmered in the sterile hospital light. He had gone gray around the muzzle gray that made him look wise in a way Sarah could not claim for herself. He was lean like a soldier trained to survive on little. And in truth, though, she never told people, Ranger had not been a pet. Ranger had originally been a failed canine candidate, too gentle, too emotional, too attached to human expressions. A trainer at a shelter had told her that once. He reads faces too much. He'll cry before he bites. Sarah had adopted him that same night. She needed something soft, something that would not abandon her. She felt like she had been invisible for so long that the idea of someone, anything, choosing to stay close felt like a small miracle. Ranger had been her only emotional anchor when her ex walked out 3 years ago, and that abandonment had crystallized the quiet coldness in her. There had been no screaming breakup. There had only been a note left on the microwave and the sound of his old truck coughing away at 3 a.m. He claimed he was leaving to chase work in Wyoming, but he never came back. Sarah never chased him. She had learned young that chasing men never led to anything but wind and disappointment. She had been raised by a mother who was all softness and apology. Sarah vowed to raise her daughter differently. She stopped, mopping for a moment, because a sharper pinch of pain rolled across her abdomen. She stood still, breathing through it, and she whispered to the unborn child inside her, "Easy. Just a little longer, please." But she did not know any more what a little longer meant or how much longer she could ask both herself and the tiny beating heart inside her to endure. Her supervisor for this shift was Diane Turner, a 56-year-old African-American woman with a soft face that contradicted the iron in her spine. Diane had tight gray curls pulled into a low bun and wore glasses that always slid down to the middle of her nose. Diane had raised 3 sons alone after her husband died from a mill accident when she was only 27. Diane was the kind of woman who did not react quickly to anything. She had the patient, weathered expression of someone who had already survived the worst possible storm long ago. Diane knocked lightly on the supply closet door, where Sarah was restacking bleach bottles for no productive reason. "Girl, you need to slow down," Diane said. Her voice was low, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world to correct people without raising her volume. "You're about to mop your bones into powder." Sarah gave the kindest smile that had no muscle behind it. "I just need to stay busy." Diane leaned against the door frame, one hand on her hip. "Busy is one thing, running yourself into the ground is another." Sarah felt the words land. She hated that they landed. She hated that Diane, who did not pry, still saw everything. Diane's eyes flicked toward Ranger and softened. "Your boy okay over there?" "He's good," Sarah whispered. "He knows when I get tired. He just waits." Diane nodded and took a breath. And you? You got everything you need, Diane said this, the way someone who had once needed help asked. She didn't say it the way caseworkers asked it. Caseworkers use that sentence like a trap. Diane used it like an open hand. Sarah swallowed. Hard. We're fine, she said, too quickly. Diane didn't push. She just gave a quiet hum, then walked away. But Sarah felt naked under that glance. She hated needing help. She hated the paperwork of poor people. She hated the idea that someone would judge whether she deserved support. She returned to the corridor and pushed the mop, but inside her mind spiraled with the emotional gravity that poverty imposes. The bills in her purse were like tiny knives stabbing her from the inside. Rent was past due. Again, she had gotten a final electricity notice. Again, and the winter here did not negotiate. The cold outside these windows was merciless enough to kill if the heat inside ever went out. She imagined herself in the future 7 months pregnant with a newborn, soon holding this mop, even when she was old bones brittle, while Ranger grew older and slower, and she'd still be here invisible scrubbing floors in winter until death found her. Sometimes she fought back tears, not because she was sad, but because she was terrified that she had already wasted the only life she would ever live. At 4 a.m., she found herself reorganizing the closet again, and she had to ask herself in a tiny whisper, when did living turn into only enduring? She closed her eyes. She saw her unborn daughter not as a real baby yet, but as an idea, a future human whose life she could not afford to fail. Sarah made herself keep moving, because if she stopped, she feared she would crumble. By 6 a.m., when her shift finally ended, she clipped the leash onto Ranger's collar. Ranger rose instantly and pressed his head into her thigh in that silent, grounding way of his. They walked out into the sub-zero parking lot where Sarah's 15-year-old Honda Civic sat under a crust of ice. The engine coughed 3 times before it ignited. Sarah slumped into the seat, rubbing her belly. Just a little longer, she whispered again. Not sure who she was begging this time. God, herself, fate, or maybe she was begging possibility itself not to forget her name. It was only 6:17 a.m. She had just enough time to go to her small apartment nap for 2 hours, then go to her diner shift at 10:30. Ranger curled in the passenger seat and put his chin on her knee. Sarah blinked hard because she suddenly felt something break inside, not like despair this time, but like the hairline crack that comes just before something opens. She wasn't sure if it was hope or madness, and she didn't know which would be more dangerous. And she didn't know yet that the letter that would change everything had already been mailed. Sarah's apartment building was the kind of place a person didn't choose but rather ended up in out of necessity. Old red brick 4 floors, radiators that clanged like angry metal demons, trapped inside the walls hallways that smelled like boiled cabbage dust and cooking oil that had soaked into the ceiling tiles from decades of other poor people before her. She pushed the door open with her hip, one hand propping the weight of her stomach, the other holding the leash looped around her wrist. Ranger trotted in first ears up, tail neutral, giving the tiny living room its first perimeter sweep like he always did. His paws clicked softly on the laminate flooring before he circled twice and lay near the futon. He wasn't just a dog. Ranger was habit and ritual, the last form of protection she trusted. Sarah threw her keys into the dented metal bowl near the door and closed her eyes because all she wanted was to collapse into sleep for a few hours before the diner shift. But when she turned toward the kitchen table, really just an old folding table she'd found for free from a church rummage sale, she saw something new wedged between junk mail and overdue notices. A thick envelope, cream-colored, a raised seal in the corner. Legal, fancy, not printed by some collection agency, not trash coupons, a name printed in serif black ink, Whitmore and Associates, Maritime Law, Charleston, SC. Sarah stared at it with the same numb confusion she used to stare at pregnancy tests. The disbelief that something printed could change the structure of her entire life. Her heart thudded in slow, suspicious beats. She dragged out the chair and sat. She opened the envelope with the same caution one might use cutting into a bomb wire. Her skin prickled. She unfolded the letter inside. The page was heavy, as if it carried a different density than all the paper she handled every day. The text introduced itself to her like a ghost. Dear Miss Sarah Miller, We have been attempting to contact you regarding the estate of Mr. Theodore Winters. Theodore Winters. The words were shapes she'd never seen. She did not know that name. She had no living family besides this unborn child and the dog at her feet. She read on. The letter informed her that Theodore was her maternal grandmother's brother's son. So technically not quite an uncle, not quite a cousin. A branch on the family tree she never knew existed. He died 6 months ago at a nursing home in Georgia. He left almost no earthly possessions, but he left one legal asset salvage rights to a commercial ship that sank on Lake Superior in 1958. Her brain flagged that sentence and tried to reject it like contaminated food. Salvage rights, Lake Superior. She placed the letter down on the table. She actually laughed out loud. Not a healthy laugh, a cracked, dry choke of disbelief. Of course, she whispered to herself. Of course, the universe would give me a dead ship, because her life was exactly like that. The world could not give her a tax refund or a promotion or even a functioning car battery. No, it would give her a ship that sank before she was born. Ranger got up and walked to her, pressing his head into her thigh. He sensed the adrenaline shift in her body. She never understood how he did it, but he always did. He whined softly. Sarah rubbed the top of his skull, her fingers brushing the dense fur between his ears. The heaviness of his presence grounded her when she floated too far into panic. She read the rest. The letter stated she was the last known relative and that salvage rights for this sunken ship, the Meridian Star II, had legally transferred to her upon probate finalization. She had no context, no map in her brain for this. She imagined a rusted hull deep under black freezing water. She imagined skeleton fish and drowned metal in ancient storms. She imagined ice cracking in the winter above it and wondered if anyone had ever come close to retrieving what lay down there. She pressed a shaking palm against her belly. Sarah felt her daughter inside her shift like a small push from within, like the baby herself was a witness to this moment. She whispered, "I don't know what to do with this." But she kept reading. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number, a direct line to the attorney handling the estate. Sarah could have ignored it. She could have torn the letter up. She was tired enough to want to tear it up. Sleep deprivation makes the brain mean, makes it rash, makes it hopeless. But something an older part of her, a stubborn ancient sliver, made her take her flip phone out of her coat pocket. She set the letter down. She dialed the number. After 2 rings, a man answered. His voice was warm, low calm, in the practiced way of a man who had spent his entire life navigating the anxiety of strangers. "Whitmore and Associates, this is Harrison Whitmore." Harrison sounded like a man in his early 50s, and in truth, that guess would not be wrong. He stood 6 feet tall, lean, with silver threaded through thick black hair, and wore tailored suits even when no one could see him. His parents had been diplomats. Harrison was raised in the art of unshakable politeness, in the subtle manipulation of tone. His voice sounded like money, not arrogant, money, old educated money. Sarah said, "My name is Sarah Miller. I got a letter." Miss Miller," Harrison said smoothly, as if he had been waiting for this call. "I was hoping you would contact me." His voice was not predatory or salesy. It had a fatigue beneath the charm, as if he'd spent decades watching families let their chances rot. "I think there's been a mistake," Sarah said. Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "I don't know any Winters." "Many don't," Harrison replied gently, "especially when a family fracturing happened long ago. But Miss Miller, your relation is genealogically verified. I assure you there is no mistake." Sarah looked at Ranger. She looked at the water stain spreading across her ceiling. She looked at an unopened electric bill on the counter. "Okay," she whispered. Her throat felt too tight. "Tell me what this is." Harrison took a breath. "It's complicated," he said. "Do you have a moment to talk?" And she sat there, in that tiny apartment that smelled faintly of bleach, with her dog's warm weight against her knee, 7 months of a human growing inside her. And she had no idea that everything about her life had just tilted. Sarah didn't sleep. Not really. When she laid down on the futon after the call, Ranger curled against her legs, his body a warm, solid weight anchoring her to the present moment. But her mind was stampeding in 10 directions at once. The radiator hissed and clanked in the corner like metal bones shifting under the skin of the apartment. She stared at the water stain spreading near the ceiling fan, brown, uneven. growing like a slow fungus, and her brain replayed Harrison's voice once and again. 2 million in 1958, adjusted to today, would exceed 20 million. That sentence would not leave her alone. It wrapped around her, tugged at her, argued with every survival instinct in her body. Her life had only ever been built on the smallest guarantees, paycheck to paycheck, penny to penny, cutting coupons, skipping meals, pretending she wasn't hungry so her child could someday eat. And now suddenly the universe had slid a number like 20 million in front of her. She was terrified of even imagining it, because hope this big had teeth. Hope this big could destroy a human being if it turned out to be a mirage. 2 hours later, still with no sleep, she drove through the snow-heavy streets toward her diner shift. Ranger sat in the passenger seat even though he wasn't allowed in the diner. He always came until she parked, then waited in the car with the windows cracked an inch and a warm blanket in the back seat. When she reached the parking lot, she leaned her forehead on the steering wheel. "We could be free," she whispered. Ranger pressed his muzzle against her arm, reading her trembling breath the same way he read every change in her emotional frequency. Her body felt electric and hollow at the same time at the diner that morning. The diner she worked in was called Bailey's, the kind of small-town American diner with faded vinyl red booths and laminated menus that still listed items like patty melt or country hash like it was 1986, and nothing bad had ever happened in the world. Customers came in wearing winter jackets and Duluth Bulldogs beanies, some older men, most with coarse, wind-scarred faces from decades working boats, some miners, some mill workers. She didn't know their names, but she knew their eyes. These were men who had lived their entire life touching danger. Men whose shoulders carried heavy decades. She wondered if any of them knew the ship Harrison spoke about. She wondered if any of them had stories. But then she remembered she was invisible. She was only the woman who refilled their coffee cups. Her shift manager, Rosa Martinez, was a small woman in her early 40s with curly black hair that she pinned under a cheap hair clip and deep dark eyes that always looked like they could see through lies easily. Rosa had moved to Minnesota from El Paso when she married a Lake Superior fisherman 10 years ago, and that fisherman drowned in a gale 3 winters later. Since then, Rosa walked with a permanent tightness around her mouth, as if trying to hold herself closed against grief. But despite her pain, Rosa wasn't unkind. She was simply realistic, and in this world, realistic voices often sounded harsh. "You okay?" Rosa asked when Sarah tied on her apron. Rosa's voice was toughened by years of survival. "You're pale like the snow outside." Sarah forced the corners of her mouth upward. "Rough night, didn't sleep much." Rosa studied her for half a second, like a woman who had seen too many others come apart. "Don't push too hard," she said, then moved along to refill the napkin holders on the counter. Sarah took orders mechanically, her mind in the letter, not in the present moment. She poured coffee. She smiled when required. She brought plates with poached eggs and pancakes and sausage to tables that blurred together. She felt herself dissociating just to keep the panic contained. 20 million. Could that be real? She had to know more. She had to understand whether this was a hallucination. On her break, she stepped outside. The wind snapped like teeth against her skin. Ranger barked quietly from the cracked window in the car, tail wagging gently. She pressed her face near the open slot. "I'm calling him again," she whispered. Ranger just looked into her with those deep, intelligent eyes of a German shepherd who had spent 7 years trying to understand the heartbreak patterns of humans. She dialed Harrison again. He answered instantly. "Miss Miller, good morning." Harrison's voice was a precise mix of politeness and weary patience, like a man who had dealt with too many skeptical heirs. "I need you to explain something," Sarah said. "Explain the value. Explain why the ship matters." "Of course," Harrison said. This ship, the Meridian Star II, was carrying a private art collection from a wealthy industrialist's estate in Louisiana to a museum in New York. Paintings, manuscripts, carved ivory, rare artifacts. The insurance claim from 1958 listed the value at $2 million. And we all know how inflation works. Sarah held her breath. Harrison continued. "However, let me be clear, this is not money sitting in boxes waiting to be picked up. It is a legal right to attempt salvage. You could attempt it yourself. Or you could sell the right to a salvage company. One company has already expressed interest. Titan Salvage. They would offer $60,000 to $75,000. Quick cash, guaranteed." $75,000. Her brain almost fainted at the simplicity of that number. That was more money than she had ever held or seen in her entire life. She could pay rent. She could set aside hospital fees. She could buy a crib. She could buy a car that didn't break every third ignition. She could breathe, but something inside her twisted at the idea of selling the entire thing for $75,000. What if the truth was that this was her one miracle? What if she was supposed to hold on? Or, Harrison said gently, you could partner with a recovery group. Legally, you can request a percentage. 40% would be standard. That means if the estimated $20 million were recovered, your portion could exceed $8 million. $8 million. That number felt like fire running under her skin, and simultaneously felt like a trap. What would you do? Sarah asked, voice shaking. I cannot advise in that way, Harrison replied. But I can say this: selling the rights is safe. Holding them is risk. That is true in every generation. Sarah thanked him and hung up. She leaned her forehead against the cold outside wall. Tears threatened. I don't know what to do, she whispered. She looked at Ranger in the car. Ranger was watching her intensely. That dog knew her patterns, knew when her voice trembled, too close to collapse. He whined and pawed lightly at the window. She pressed her fingers to the glass over his paw. The wind whipped hard enough that her belly tightened painfully again. She breathed through it. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She returned to the diner robotic. She finished the shift like a ghost. And at the end of the shift, when she finally sat in her car with Ranger and put both hands on her belly, she realized that this wasn't just about her. She wasn't choosing just for herself anymore. There was another life in her body now. A tiny girl who would one day look up at her and ask what she did when she had a chance to change everything. Sarah had no answer yet, but she knew she had to find one. She knew she could not rush, because one wrong move could destroy the only miracle she had ever been offered. And Ranger pressed his head to her lap again, as if telling her without words, "Don't be afraid," and she whispered back, "I'm trying not to be." The next morning, the snow came sideways off Lake Superior, like tiny razor blades cutting through the air. Duluth in winter is a strange cathedral, white hollow and echoing like a frozen kingdom that forgot the concept of mercy. Sarah stood in the ice-bitten wind, holding Ranger's leash with numb fingers, her breath forming small gray ghosts in the air. She had called the diner and told Rosa she needed one day off for family legal issues. Rosa didn't ask questions. Maybe Rosa recognized the tremor in Sarah's voice. Or maybe Rosa knew that sometimes a woman didn't need interrogation, just temporary space to breathe. Sarah couldn't tell Rosa or anyone what she was about to do. She didn't even know herself. She just knew she had to see the lake. She had to see the place where the Meridian Star 2 lay buried under the black winter water. She had to know if this could possibly be real. She waited near the Old North Pier. Ranger sat beside her, solid and steady, his thick sable coat catching the snow in flecks that melted into his fur. He held himself, tall ears, high body still alert, in the way that German shepherds are born, knowing how to be. He looked like the only creature here who truly belonged to the sharpness of this world. Sarah looked across the water. Lake Superior was black like a chasm, a wide mouth swallowing light. She placed one hand low under her belly, the other wrapped tight around the leash. "We're here," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the baby or to the memory of a man she never met. And then she heard boots crunching on the ice-packed snow walkway. A man approached, tall, maybe 5'11", lean, with broad shoulders and a wiry strength that came from doing the kind of labor that leaves permanent lines in the hands. He looked mid-30s, with black hair under a winter beanie that had a tear near the seam. His jaw was sharp enough that even the stubble on his chin looked like it had been chiseled into place. He wore an industrial-grade winter jacket, navy blue, slightly scuffed, with reflective orange piping. He had olive-toned skin and deep, calculating eyes, like a man who had spent too many hours staring at sonar screens and trying to interpret shadows into decisions. "Sarah Miller?" he asked. His voice was steady but not warm, more like a man who had learned long ago that the world doesn't reward softness. "I'm Marcus." Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. This was Marcus Chen. Harrison had given her his number the night before, and she'd sent him a shaky text message. "Can you show me where it sank?" Marcus Chen wasn't just a random salvage guy. He'd been one of the few divers on a Coast Guard retrieval contract 3 years back when a fishing trawler overturned. That incident had taken 2 lives, both brothers. After that, Marcus became even quieter, people said. He was known to be haunted by the mistakes of men who cut corners. He didn't tolerate carelessness. Some said he no longer laughed. He didn't confirm or deny any of it. He just kept working. Marcus eyed Ranger carefully. Ranger eyed him back, ears pricked, posture alert, but not aggressive. Marcus nodded, approving the dog's discipline. "He listens to you," he said. Sarah exhaled a visible plume. "He's all I have." Marcus made a small grunt, not sympathy exactly, but some recognition that her words weren't an exaggeration, and beckoned her forward, motioning her toward the small office structure near the ice-rimmed dock. Inside was warmer, though the air smelled like sea salt, mildew, and old rope. The walls were lined with maps of Lake Superior sonar scans, depth charts, water current vectors marked in red grease pen. A portable heater rattled near the corner. Marcus pointed at a desk where a small laptop sat open, a sonar mapping software visible on the screen. Ranger sat beside Sarah's leg, eyes shifting from Marcus to the screen with interest. Marcus tapped the screen. 7 anomalies in this grid here. Most are small rock ridges or some rusted iron from old tug wrecks. He zoomed into a particular signature. But this one, this long structure, 240 feet dimensions, match a Liberty-class freighter. His finger hovered above the glowing rectangle of data like he was touching something sacred through the glass. Meridian Star 2 was Liberty-class. Sarah felt her spine tighten. The baby shifted inside her belly, as if reacting to the gravity of those words too. She laid a hand on her stomach, steadying herself. Ranger leaned lightly against her knee. Marcus watched her carefully, his voice flat but not cruel. "You understand, this isn't a guarantee. That could be the hull, or it could be nothing but a ghost signature." Sarah swallowed, but it could be real. Marcus held her gaze for 3 long seconds. The heater clanked again, wind slicing against the door outside like a blade. "Yes," he said simply, "it could be." She turned her face toward the map again. Marcus studied her. He was the kind of man who saw patterns before words. "Why are you here personally?" he asked. "Most heirs sell rights without ever bothering to look at water." Sarah stared at the screen, eyes burning. "Because selling it feels like admitting I don't deserve more than the life I've been handed." Marcus crossed his arms, "and trying to raise a wreck is rolling the dice with your entire future." "I know," she whispered. Ranger nudged her elbow, soft but insistent. Marcus watched this silent exchange between woman and dog, and something changed in his expression. Not pity, but a flicker of respect. He reached to his desk drawer and pulled out a laminated chart. "I don't do this for everyone," he said quietly, "but I'll show you something." He spread the chart flat. It was a cold water current drift model. If you want a shot at the hull, you have from April to late October. You try too early, ice blocks everything. You try too late, you get trapped by storms. Sarah blinked hard. "So if I choose to do this?" "You have 1 season," Marcus finished for her. 1, that's it. Sarah looked at Ranger. Ranger looked at her. She pressed both hands against her belly. 2 lives inside her body. 2 futures, 1 risk. And she made herself say the words that terrified her. "I want to try." The day Marcus ran the sonar scan, the lake was so still, it looked like a sheet of polished black metal placed under a sky of burnt ash. The air was clear, but the quiet was unnerving. No gulls, no wind howl, just the sound of the portable sonar unit humming. The world looked like the kind of moment when time inhaled but never exhaled. Sarah stood inside the small salvage vessel Marcus had access to, an old 32-foot utility boat, used occasionally by research grad students from University of Minnesota Duluth. He'd borrowed it with the help of a favor from an old colleague. The deck smelled like old rope, diesel fumes, and iron rust. Ranger lay near Sarah's boots, but his eyes stayed open, tracking every sound, every vibration under the hull, like he was mapping danger by intuition. Sarah's coat flapped against her thighs in the cold breeze. Her hair was tied back in that low bun she always wore, though loose strands kept blowing across her lips. She brushed them away with the back of a gloved hand. Marcus stood across from her, his posture rigid, arms crossed. The morning light cut across his profile, and she realized he had those sharp cheekbones that men who spent their lives outdoors eventually get, those kinds of bone lines sculpted by grief, salt wind, and cold. He stared at the sonar screen with a tension she couldn't decode. He had shaved for once, reducing the stubble to a faint shadow. Maybe today mattered to him too. His assistant for the day, a burly half-Swedish, half-Norwegian guy named Lucas Strom, stood at the controls. Lucas was in his late 20s, 6'3", with broad shoulders, thick like a lumberjack's blonde, hair shaved at the sides, and long on top, eyes pale blue like glacier meltwater. He had been a diver for the Coast Guard Auxiliary before he blew out his left eardrum, decompressing too fast, which forced him out of deep dive work. It had made him bitter for a couple years, Marcus once told her, but Lucas grew into a man who accepted he could still be close to the water even if he could not go into the abyss anymore. He had a gentle sarcasm in his voice, unhurried, unpressured, but it came from a place of once feeling cheated by life. He glanced at Sarah now. "First rule of salvage," he said with a half smirk. "Everything looks like a ghost until it doesn't." She almost smiled. Almost. But her heart was too heavy, too raw, too alive with the fear that she might be stupid enough to believe in miracles. The sonar unit pinged again. The digital readout sharpened. Marcus leaned forward. Lucas adjusted dials, and slowly, grainy, hazy, it emerged. A long shadow on the screen like a dark creature sleeping at the bottom of the world. Sarah held her breath. The outline became sharper as the sensor passed above it. The rectangular shape, the broken bow line. And then Marcus whispered, "There." He didn't have to raise his voice. That single syllable cracked the world. "There." He zoomed. The image resolved. 240 feet. Liberty-class dimensions. The outline of a hull smashed down against the lake bed. And then clearer, a section of metal plating at just the right angle revealed ghost letters. S-A-R-2. Sarah choked on her breath. She felt something inside her body crack open, not a physical pain, but an emotional rupture. Every burden she carried, every humiliation she endured, every night she went to bed hungry so she could save $10 toward formula, someday all of it rose like a tide. This was real. This wasn't a trick. Her uncle, this man she had never known, had left her something that existed. Something buried underwater. Something valuable. Something her entire bloodline had never had the chance to touch. Her knees weakened. She gripped Ranger's leash until her knuckles whitened. Ranger leaned against her shin, steady like a pillar. He didn't bark. He didn't shove his nose against her. He simply pressed his weight, their silent, loyal present. Marcus turned toward her. His voice was flat, businesslike, but there was the faintest tremor behind the monotone. "We need capital, equipment rentals, ROV leasing, a professional recovery team. We can't wait. If we don't start making moves before mid-April, by summer, the competition will sniff this out." Sarah blinked, mind spinning, heart pounding. "How long do I have?" Marcus exhaled. He looked older suddenly. "Weeks, maybe less. Salvage companies monitor everything. One rumor gets out and Titan Salvage will swarm like sharks." Lucas nodded. "Titan doesn't play fair," he said. "They'll lowball you, then steal your recovery window." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "Titan offered me $75,000 to buy the rights." Marcus's jaw tightened. That's what they do. They bank on desperation. They assume poor people want fast relief more than real future. Sarah felt heat behind her eyes. They're not wrong to assume that. And suddenly her own voice sounded like confession. 7 months pregnant, rent late, no safety net. $75,000 could save her life instantly. Or 8 million could change the DNA of her bloodline forever. She stared at the sonar screen again. Watched the ghost ship flicker like a dream that would vanish if she blinked too long. Marcus stepped closer, not in an intimate way, but in a precise, serious way. "Sarah, if you sell, you walk away safe. You can pay your bills. You can stabilize your future. No shame in that choice." Sarah's eyes burned. "But if I keep it, you could walk away with nothing," Marcus said. "Or you could walk away with more than you ever believed possible." The silence after that sentence felt like the entire lake paused to hear her heart decide. Ranger nudged her hand again, gently, insistently, like he was trying to remind her that courage sometimes was simply choosing the unknown. She stared out across Lake Superior, dark and endless. Snow started falling again, slow at first, like tiny white feathers drifting from a wounded sky. Sarah put her hand over her belly. She could feel her daughter shifting inside her, small, stubborn, alive. She looked at Ranger. She looked at the shadow of Star 2. She looked at Marcus. And with a voice that barely cracked, she said, "I'm not selling. We bring that ship up." Marcus didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted, something like respect or the acceptance of a vow. Lucas exhaled quietly and nodded like a man who had just witnessed a flag being planted. Ranger sat tall, ears forward, as if he had been waiting for her to choose. And the wind finally exhaled. In the end, her story reminds us of something most of us forget until life corners us. Miracles almost never look like miracles at the beginning. Sometimes God doesn't hand you the blessing already polished. Sometimes he hands you a wreck buried at the bottom of freezing black water and asks, "Do you still have the courage to believe I put something valuable inside this?" Faith is not just what we say in church. It is often found in the small daily decisions we make while we are still scared, still broke, still unsure, still hurting. Miracles don't always walk toward us dressed like angels. Sometimes they appear disguised as impossible work, unfair risk, unreasonable hope. And God waits to see if we will step toward it anyway. So if you're watching this right now, maybe you have your own sunken ship in your life. Maybe the world tells you it's worthless. Maybe people tell you to settle for the safe little number instead of the miracle-sized promise. Don't give up. Sometimes the Lord hides the blessing beneath the deep water, because only those who believe he is still working will ever dive deep enough to reach it. If this touches you, comment amen. Tell us where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs a sign today. And subscribe to this channel because tomorrow's story might be the exact message God is preparing for your breakthrough. May God bless you and protect your home, heal your heart, and give you the strength to believe in the miracles hidden beneath your own stormy waters. Amen.